Hi, we're back with First Kings. Now, before I jump into it, I don't know if you're having the same experience that I am. I'm reading these stories of some of these men that were revered and thought of as great men, like when I was young, and reading them now, like studying the Bible now, I'm seeing how less than perfect they all were. And I mean, I find it comforting. I don't even find it disappointing at all because it makes them less intimidating, and it makes it maybe less intimidating for me to think of myself as, attaining some sort of greatness, because you know how it is. We all kind of exclude ourselves or count ourselves out from great feats because of what we believe will be our weaknesses. Now, the first recorded act of Solomon as king was that he married Pharaoh's daughter. Now, you would wonder why someone who was from the line of Israel would go back to the land that God delivered them from to marry the daughter of the Pharaoh. But it was most likely a treaty to gain political ground and gain more territory. But it also violated God's prohibition of marriage with pagans in Deuteronomy 7:3. The people were also sacrificing to idols at the time. Solomon, although he loved the Lord and was walking in his statutes and working in the path of his father David, also participated in these sacrifices to idols. That's his first breach of the law against idolatry that God gave in Deuteronomy 12:3. Now, can I stop and say that so far, David seems to be the only king that didn't deviate from the Lord. Like, yes, he had his shortcomings, his women and his vices, but it was never recorded that he sacrificed to idols, worshipped idols, or did like Saul. Saul was consulting mediums and all. His heart was for God, and I feel like perhaps that's why he was truly seen as a man after God's heart. Right. Solomon obviously had a divided heart, a common practice among the Israelites at the time. Solomon didn't set a good example for the people from what we see. The king shows a lack of trust in God from his actions by trying to synthesize worshiping God and sacrificing to idols at the same time, which was like a common thing. Remember that Saul too always tried to please the people. Nevertheless, before he goes up to Gibeon, where the tabernacle was, and ironically was also the location of the biggest pagan temple or shrine, he offered 1,000 burnt offerings, presumably to God, on that altar. Then God appears to him. Now, the Lord's appearance to him in a dream, asking him what he wanted from him, perplexed me, because I was like, here's God who knows what this guy is and his double standards and his double minds, but he went to him to ask him what he wanted. Well, but later I understood that it was all part of God's plan. Remember that his promises prevail in spite of our performance or non-performance. Now, Solomon asked for and received wisdom from God. Obedience to the covenant law was still necessary for him to take advantage of that gift. And in verse 14, after God had given him the wisdom and all the other good things he didn't ask for, he said, "If you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and commandments as your father David did, I'll lengthen your days." So his wisdom and the gifts that God was giving to him was dependent on his obedience. Solomon's wisdom in dealing with the two harlots, because we saw after he had received wisdom, we now start to see him use it, right? Fighting, that's the two harlots that were fighting over a baby. We all know the story. I remember as a child hearing that thing and it was just so devastating. I was like, what kind of thing is this? But it was his first test of wisdom, and he not only gave wise judgment, but also showed extreme justice. Because to believe in those times that harlots could get an audience with the king and get judgment, showed perhaps maybe how approachable he was. Chapter 4 begins with details of his cabinet, the people who served with him and the nation of Israel. 2 of his admin officers were his sons-in-law. It's obvious from chapter 4:20 that God had since fulfilled his covenant promise to Abraham to make his descendants as numerous as the sand on the sea. Remember, because God lived up to his part of the covenant, because in that fact we see how so many, the children of Israel were. But the Israelites obviously did not live up to theirs, as we'll come to see. Solomon was obviously a very lavish king, as we read on, because unlike his father David, who supported himself through personal income and then also, taxes on foreign subjects, because remember, then he would go out and conquer and then, subdue those nations. Here we see that Solomon and his crew had a very heavy tax burden on the children of Israelites, and he was doing this to like fund his lifestyle. I thought it ridiculous when they were giving the breakdown of how much they eat and all, I was like, what on earth? But we see that this would later create a problem and resentment among the people. We see also that he amassed horses and chariots in verse 4 and 26, which was a direct contravention of God's command to Israel's king. Read Deuteronomy 17. You will see specifically the things that God has said that the kings shouldn't do, and one of this was amassing horses and chariots, women. Just know that Solomon was just not that guy. But here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. God is always what we're looking for. I'll say it again. God is always what we're looking for. When our hearts are divided like Solomon's and the Israelites were, God doesn't discard us. He's still there, like he was in Solomon's dream, asking him, "What do you want from me?" Ask it. So he says, "What do you want from me?" Ask it. Solomon knew that the wisdom he required to rule the people could only come from a generous God, who not only gave him what he asked for, but gave him all the other things he didn't ask for, because he was impressed at the fact that he asked for wisdom. Even in the midst of our sins, let's draw close to God, because he's always there, and never hesitate to ask him the things that we need. And we know that and we trust that he will give us that and even much more. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we'll go to 1 Chronicles 1, another book that we're starting. See how we're just like racing through, and before you know anything, we'll be like halfway through. And we'll also be taking lessons from Psalm 72. So see you here. Thanks for joining me. Bye.